It is the ASEAN Korea Global VC Conference, and up next, we would like to welcome Mr. Vinnie LAURIA. Now, he's the founding partner of Golden Gate Ventures, and he'll be making another keynote speech. What he's going to do is give us a glimpse of the startup scene here in Southeast Asia. So, from Korea, we expand out to Southeast Asia. Mr. LAURIA, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to KVIC for inviting me. I'm gonna launch the presentation here. Okay, cool. My name is Vinnie LAURIA. Part of Golden Gate Ventures. Yes, there it goes. So just a brief history of us. Venture capital firm. Next year is going to be our 10th anniversary. So I've been in the region for a decade. Been investing many different verticals, have learned a lot, and that's what I'd like to share here today. I try to do a really good cross section of interesting activity. I'm sure some names you're familiar with, and I'll share my own perspective on them. So it's not really just our portfolio, but it's all the activity here in Southeast Asia. And what I think is kind of helpful to know is, so I'm American, here in the region. And for me, it is a really exciting time. I was very bullish on Southeast Asia 10 years ago, and I continue to be today. Because of COVID, I still think there's a great future. So I want to talk about what makes Southeast Asia unique. Let me just split my screen here with the slides to go forward to make it easier. Okay. So we have a very, very diverse population. You know, as an American, you might think Southeast Asia, one country or something along those natures, but the reality is it's many different countries, and per country, there's many different ethnicities, languages, and different styles of culture. And that's really important to really understand that. So hundreds of ethnic groups, but it's expected to contribute almost 10% to global growth over the next decade. That's what makes this region very, very exciting to me. And the other huge thing that's happening here is it's like China 15 years ago. You have this emergence of a middle class. You have people moving from rural into cities, people going from uneducated to being educated. And so that's where a lot of the growth is, and that's what we're investing in. And I think that's where a lot of opportunity exists. Just to give comparison of these different networks, you have Philippines versus Indonesia. If you've been to either, you're familiar with the amount of traffic. Singapore compared to country that's Vietnam. It's very stark difference in terms of infrastructure, transportation, and then services that are being built. And this is some of the challenges for a Gojek going regional, a Lazada going regional, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the successful strategies they're using. Malaysia, Thailand. So who are some of these new titans? Who are some of these bigger companies? I actually, the word new, for some it is recent, but for a lot they've been around for almost a decade as well. So they're brand names that people should recognize. This is just a cross section of some of the biggest companies. And again, I didn't want to focus on just our investments. There's a few there, but the vast majority of this are just the big players in Southeast Asia. And I try to break it out by who's kind of identifying some different verticals. And what's interesting here is for these companies, some of the verticals you might look at, logistics, e-commerce, you kind of, that's almost boring, the older sort of school stuff, but that's what's really exciting. And there are very, very new methods that are being formed here. Carousel with classifieds being mobile was completely different than the eBay and Craigslist model, which led then to different behaviors, different interactions, in-person meetup, bidding, people selling through social streams. So Southeast Asia, because it's mobile first, allows people to really innovate on these business models that have existed in other parts of the world for 2 decades, but are being reinvented in this part of the world. And then we find them being copied in the carousel example, by OfferUp in Europe. And so these Western counterparts are now copying what's happened in Southeast Asia. Gojek would be another great example of Western companies looking to, how is this different? This isn't Uber, this isn't DD, this is something very, very different that evolved in Indonesia. And so Gojek started out not even as an app, but it was basically a call center and a Twitter account where you could basically ping to hire a motorcycle taxi. And then from there, Nadeem built it into an app and then built it into a multi-billion-dollar company that now does obviously ride hailing, but delivery, food delivery, entertainment, services, payments. GoPay just spun out, being backed by PayPal, Google, and a number of like very, very large US companies that realize GoPay is going to dominate in Indonesia. If anybody has any questions, I'm not sure of the format, if it can be put through chat, happy to answer. But Gojek is fundamentally different than Grab, and that's why I wanted to show this one as an example. Grab started as ride hailing and did go into these other services, but it was almost an afterthought. We are small investors in Gojek and only came in later, but I did meet Nadeem early on, and to hear him before the app was even built talk about the payments infrastructure and allowing a delivery driver to go into a restaurant and order food. They're not going to have enough payment, so he's going to have to allow the customer and the merchant to kind of connect outside of the driver. Like, he was thinking of all this stuff before the app was even built, and that is where Gojek has been this really amazing product. What Grab has, which is also very amazing, and there's rumors now of them talking about merging. What Grab has is incredibly good DNA to go regional. Grab started in Malaysia, then was in Singapore, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. They're across the region, and they've done that really, really well. Gojek has stumbled as it's tried to go regional. They went to go open up in the Philippines. They got shut down by regulators in day one. Grab, using local partners and JVs, was able to navigate those waters. And so, two different types of companies that have made a lot of value going about it very different ways. And that's why they're talking about a JV, a merger. I don't think there's one clear answer. Are you a product company first? Or are you a regional company first? Both have their value. The next company, public company, so this is SEA Group, started off as Garena, a gaming company. Again, a brand that people should be familiar with. What's really interesting is there's predominantly two drivers here. So there's their gaming business, which is incredibly profitable and has been licensing games from like Tencent and reselling them locally in Southeast Asia, and that's been generating a lot of cash. But Shopee has been a marketplace, e-commerce marketplace, that has been really come from behind to take top positions in markets, Singapore, Indonesia. Now, it might not be number one in some of these markets, but it was definitely the third, the fourth player compared to like a Tokopedia, compared to Lazada. All of a sudden, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, I mean, they worked very, very hard. It's really come ahead. Part of their strategy to get ahead was to subsidize their growth. So in Indonesia, they made it free to ship things. They would sometimes even credit back the seller if they had to pay for shipping. People were abusing the system. They were just, I'm going to send something to my brother. I'll then bill it, and then I'll get, make $4 by saying I shipped it. I didn't, and he'll say accepted it. So people were doing that. Shopee, this wasn't, public news, they didn't mind. That was subsidizing growth. It was transaction volume, even though it was kind of phantom, but they were able to switch that on to legitimate sort of transaction volume. So by raising more capital, doing these sort of campaigns, doing these integrations, they've really put themselves ahead. And now they've have, soccer players that promote Shopee, and that actually works really well in Southeast Asia, having those sort of promotions. Job Street. So this is a job portal. Again, kind of old school technology. I'm sure there's a number of companies that have been doing this in Korea for about 2 decades, but they are a very, very big company, over $500 million in funding to date. They exist with different titles and different properties across Southeast Asia. They are a great example of a company that understands how to go regional. Again, it's not just having a different language. Sometimes there needs to be a different product name. Sometimes there needs to be different offerings, different partners, different business models in each country. This is a deep tech company. Started in Singapore and then has gone pretty global. And so I also want to just highlight here in Southeast Asia that it's not only just the consumer-facing apps, but this is for tracking and using QR codes to get the prices of items, find more information of items, or add it to a shopping cart. using augmented reality. Entertainment is also big. So Bigo Live, it's had a very interesting journey. Taiwanese company and a Singapore company came together a few years ago to really dominate N17 and Parlor. And so they together have now made a massive entertainment live streaming similar to some of the biggest platforms in China. They were rumored, or they were supposed to go public in New York. They ended up pulling that very last minute. But they've made a really, really strong live streaming business here in Southeast Asia that's really actively used. And what's interesting is there's opportunity for companies like this to build it in Southeast Asia, because some of the folks from China, some of the folks in the US, well, the US, it just doesn't, on this side, doesn't really dominate. In China, there is, but this is where the Chinese playbook for coming into Southeast Asia generally has been, rather than pushing and advertising on your own, like we don't see Alibaba pushing, their own products, Alipay or Tencent pushing really hard with WeChat. I mean, they do try to make some inroads there, but what they do is they invest behind some of the companies like this, behind some commerce companies, behind some payments companies in order to have that footprint in Southeast Asia. Tiki, e-commerce site in Vietnam. So the really big, and one of the themes here is that you'll see is a lot of these companies tend to operate in one of three markets: Singapore, Indonesia, or Vietnam. And so even though Southeast Asia is a dozen countries, we focus on about a handful of those. So the three I just mentioned, plus Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. But in terms of massive amounts of funding, massive amounts of growth and opportunity, these are the markets that tend to take the most sort of attention. So it's really important, if you are investing in Southeast Asia, to have a footprint in these markets. We have two offices, Singapore and Indonesia. We'll be opening up a Vietnamese office soon. We just did a huge event there with the government. It's a really, really important market. Traveloka. So obviously hit by COVID, the travel industry, but before COVID was on a tear. During COVID, they made really hard layoffs early on. To their credit, that is the direction some CEOs need to take in an industry like this. They've successfully raised a pretty healthy amount of funding just recently. They are going to outlast the pandemic because they have enough capital and enough runway. And when travel does come back online, maybe it's a year away, maybe it's even longer, 2 to 3 years, they're going to be in a phenomenal position to ride that growth once again. So this is, even if, there's opportunity to secondary or a down round, even though it's in the travel space, we're not investors. I do think Traveloka would be a great investment because they were dominating pre-COVID and they're going to dominate again. When I first heard it, so yeah, this is an opportunity that they never formally pitched to us, but like when I first came across Traveloka in the region, I asked myself, like, how would they compete against an Expedia, a Booking.com, and Agoda? Because, these companies advertise globally, travel is global, business, vacation, people going to Bali. How are you going to compete with that? And it took me a few years to realize it's because Traveloka is localized. They're not going for the global audience. They're going for the local audience. They're going for Indonesians who travel for business and for vacation, Thais who travel for business and vacation. They tend to stay in 2-star hotels or budget accommodations. And it's a very different sort of travel style. The Expedias of the world don't have those on the platform. Most of these budget accommodations don't even have software to integrate with Expedia and Booking.com. So it requires WhatsApp and phone calls and agents and people. So this is where Traveloka really dominated. And so the name of the game here is around localization. It's not just localizing for the language, but it's for how the business actually works and the services you provide. And that's why Expedia wrote a really big check into them 2 years ago and then again this year, because Expedia knows they need a local partner for that sort of exposure. So what I did here was just, again, I didn't want to go through every company. So the ones that are grayed out, I have talked about. So I mentioned Grab. A few other things I will kind of highlight. So Sendit, which is a portfolio company, they are in the payment space. They've built a phenomenal business in Indonesia, and now they're expanding into other markets, just being something similar to Stripe, where it's just an API that e-commerce companies can use to collect payments. The biggest pain point has been for the past decade, and like still continues to be, how do people pay for anything digitally? Everybody has cash. It's a very cash-oriented economy, especially for the bottom of the pyramid. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have a Visa or MasterCard logo in their wallet. So how do they pay for things online? And this is where services like Send It become really important. They allow bank transfers, they allow top-ups. You can go to a 7-Eleven, or you can pay with a credit card. And for a merchant, it's all API oriented. Another one I'll mention, Wrong Guru, just because education tech. This has been, we're not an investor. This has been their year because of COVID. There's been a lot of remote learning. Wrong Guru has really stepped up. They've had great relationships with the government, which is very, very important here in Asia. And they've become kind of the de facto platform, the standard platform that a lot of schools are using in Indonesia. So this is where COVID has had, devastating effects, and especially in the US, globally. But for some verticals, startups have actually really leaned in. Education, health tech, commerce, logistics, these have all been growing. A number of our companies in these spaces have raised this year. As a VC, it's our goal to, predict the future, 5 to 10 years out. And I would say that basically what COVID's done this past now 10 months is basically, 10 months they've accelerated what the behaviors would have been over the next 5 to 10 years. They compressed that down into less than a year. So it's very, very interesting to see how some of these behaviors have evolved over the past year. And I think they will stick, post-COVID. So I have a few minutes left. This next decade is Southeast Asia's decade. I'm very, very bullish on that, like I was 10 years ago. Basically, the growth, GDP growth, again, people moving from rural to urban, manufacturing because of US-China trade tensions, moving into places like Vietnam. Samsung, Korean company, now makes half their phones in Vietnam. They've done this shift over the past few years. A lot of companies are making that shift. So Vietnam is rising very quickly. Chinese companies trying to be more neutral are picking Singapore as this is where we want to be. And to me, Singapore is both a hub for Southeast Asia, but it's also a global, it's an international hub. Davos, the World Economic Forum, which has been in Davos for decades, presidents, prime ministers, they fly in there. Singapore is hosting that next year. They've never made a switch like that. So Singapore is this international city, but it's key in Southeast Asia. And it's this symbiotic relationship. It doesn't have a very big market, but Indonesia does and Vietnam does. But Singapore is a place that has governance and safety of business, and it's a platform for investment. And so they work very well together. And then finally, just around the growth in Southeast Asia, what is kind of predicted and where it's been coming. Might be a little bit hard to read some of those numbers, but I will, so Southeast Asia in terms of the emerging markets as a growth predicted for 2021 for next year is some of the highest in the world. And this is from the World Economic Forum. So Southeast Asia is supposed to have the highest economic growth of any region globally. So good place to put money. I would always say that even 10 years ago, China is always going to be bigger, even India, bigger from an economic standpoint. But the delta, the year-over-year change, and that's what we as a VC look to invest in, is that growth is massively huge and is an exciting opportunity here. Yeah. And so with that, I would like to thank everybody. Appreciate everyone's time and this opportunity to talk about the region. Thank you to David.
Thank you very much, Mr. LAURIA, for speaking to us this morning. Of course, that was Mr. Vinnie LAURIA, who was talking about the startup scene in Southeast Asia.